Okay, I have got too many electronic things going on. But first of all, I just want to say welcome and welcome back. I hope you all have had a good day. Johnny's not with us today, but we do have Darla in the control booth as always. And so today is we're just doing breaking news, and it probably will be a rather short broadcast. Yeah. For one thing, I just want to talk about the big story that broke today, which is that the Federal Trade Commission is suing the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. And that is of interest to a lot of people who have been on the podcast. And so we're just going to stick with that. I'm not a lawyer, as you all know. I don't pretend to be one, and neither am I a clinician. But I am a historian, and I can read and read pretty well. And so what I thought we would do today is I would just tell you who the plaintiffs are, who the defendants are, what the major points in the filed lawsuit are. And I thought I would open up by just telling you what some of the definitions for the terms are in the lawsuit. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, first of all, these are the let's go back. The Federal Trade Commission, yes. Okay. The plaintiffs are the Federal Trade Commission of the United States, which of course is interested in consumer issues and consumer fraud. The other plaintiffs are the states of Alaska, Iowa, Nebraska, and Texas, also being brought by their bureaus or departments of consumer fraud. The defendants, let me run that. Okay, those are the plaintiffs. The defendants are WPATH Inc., which is a Texas corporation, and Illinois, and WPATH Inc., an Illinois corporation, and the United States Professional Association for Transgender Health. And these are going to be some terms to have some understanding of, so that you can understand the complaint. The first is what a preliminary injunction is. A preliminary injunction keeps things in place while litigation is pending, requiring proof of irreparable harm and likelihood of success. That is what they have a preliminary injunction at this point. It's a short-term remedy just to keep things where they already are. The second term we might need to be aware of is what is a permanent injunction. A permanent injunction is a final court order requiring a party to continue to perform or stop performing specific actions. The permanent injunction is issued when the court determines monetary damages are insufficient to prevent ongoing or irreparable harm. And that is a long-term remedy. Another term is irreparable harm. The applicant will suffer ongoing irreversible harm if the conduct continues. And so I think that what that means is it's not just that people in the past have been harmed, but if something that isn't done about this harm, it will keep going and keep causing other people to suffer. Then there is the balance of hardships. The relief is fair and the benefits outweigh the burden on the defendant. So let's say they have to pay a monetary damages or stop how they are operating. That outweighs what is going on with the burden on the defendant who has to pay those monies or change those practices is greater than what plaintiffs are suffering and what plaintiffs in the future might suffer. Disgorgement is a legal remedy where a party is forced to give up profits obtained through illegal, unethical, or wrongful acts. Its primary goal is to prevent unjust enrichment and ensuring wrongdoers do not profit from misconduct. So those are some of the technical terms. Now, if you'll bear with me, I'll get the complaint itself in front of me. I'm obviously not going to read, the 10, I've forgotten I had done that, the 10 core deceptive statements. This is not easy. Okay, all right. Here's the first one. And I had forgotten I made banners for them. And I think it's important to try to receive and digest what these core misrepresentations, that is on the part of WPATH and the other defendants, the misrepresentations that are being alleged and are in question. First is that WPATH misrepresents that pediatric medical transition is medically necessary to prevent suicide in children who express dissatisfaction with or report distress about their sex traits. Number 2, thank you, Darla. WPATH misrepresents that pediatric medical transition is effective at preventing suicide in children who express dissatisfaction with or report distress about their sex traits. The third core misrepresentation is that WPATH misrepresents that puberty blockers are fully reversible. And I want to say too, okay, I lost my thought. These are the core, this is what the FTC and its co-plaintiffs are saying are the core problems with WPATH. Okay, 4 is that WPATH misrepresents that cross-sex hormones improve mental health. 5, WPATH misrepresents that performing breast amputations on children is safe, effective, and consistently results in better health and quality of life. 6, WPATH misrepresents SOC 8, which is WPATH Standards of Care, the 8th version. WPATH misrepresents that SOC 8 is the result of unbiased, evidence-based, expert consensus. 7, WPATH misrepresents that pediatric medical transition is the standard of care for children who express dissatisfaction with or report distress about their sex traits. 8, WPATH fails in Standards of Care 8 to adequately disclose certain side effects of puberty blockers, including hot flashes, lethargy, and cognitive problems. 9, WPATH Standards of Care 8 fails to adequately disclose certain side effects of cross-sex hormones, including mood disturbances, vocal pain, pelvic floor dysfunction, clitoral discomfort and continuing, vaginal pain, persistent sexual dysfunction, continuing after cessation of use, and erectile pain. And 10, WPATH fails in SOC8 to adequately disclose certain side effects of breast amputations, including inability to breastfeed, nerve damage, and necrosis of the nipples. And I had to look up what necrosis was in the medical sense, and it is the term for premature death of cells and living tissue. It occurs when a localized area of tissue doesn't receive enough blood supply and is often caused by severe injury. Okay, now I'm going to make my effort again to come over to the complaint itself. It is 123 pages. So, of course, I'm not going to try to read all of that to you or go over it, but I just want to hop down to page 117, where it talks about what the FTC and its co-complainants are saying are the injuries to the consumers. They say that children and parents have suffered, are suffering, and will continue to suffer substantial injury because of the defendant's violation of the FTC Act, the Alaska Consumer Protection Act, the Iowa, the Nebraska, and the Texas acts against consumer fraud. And the complaint says that absent injunctive relief by this court, defendants are likely to continue to injure consumers and harm the public interest. And so this is what they're asking for. They call it a prayer for relief. First, enter a permanent injunction to prevent future violations of the FTC Act and the other consumer fraud acts. Award civil penalties, restitution, attorney's fees, and costs, and other appropriate relief as authorized in the Consumer Fraud Acts. Award Iowa, Nebraska, Texas, civil penalties, disgorgement, attorney's fees, costs, and other appropriate relief as authorized in their courts. Okay, so that is for the Federal Trade Commission, and I think I may have skipped further ahead than I wanted to. Yeah, let's go back to page 103 if you happen to have it. That's the core deceptive statements, which I read to you. And then it says that WPATH made each of these 10 misrepresentations or omissions expressly or by implication. WPATH knew they were false or misleading, and WPATH further knew and intended that they would provide WPATH members and other providers of medical transition services with the means to mislead consumers. Each of these 10 misrepresentations was and is important to WPATH members and other providers of transition services Each of these representations were and are important to the children who receive and parents who pay for those services. As a result of these 10 central misrepresentations and omissions, and as pleaded herein, unlawful deception occurred and continues to occur. Each of these 10 misrepresentations or omissions occurred at least in certain specific instances detailed herein. In particular, WPATH misrepresents that pediatric medical transition is medically necessary to prevent suicide. And it says, oh, it's down here in the footnotes, but honest to Pete, I think I'm just going to leave it at that, because the complaint is online, and you can, if you're interested in a really in-depth look at it, you can do that. But I don't think I will hold out for very long. It's been a pretty grueling day, and I'm not feeling well. A new medication that is messing with me. But it is important to say that in 2008, WPATH misleadingly asserted that medical transition is, quote, not cosmetic or elective or for the mere convenience of the patient, end quote, but instead was, quote, understood to be medically necessary. And that is a quote from WPATH. And I'm going to avoid any commentary just because we want to get through with this as quickly as we can, and maybe come back to it in the future. WPATH asserts in SOC 8 that not providing medical transition services can lead to depression and anxiety. When WPATH released Standards of Care 7, the one that preceded Standards of Care 8, sorry, a niece of mine had a miscarriage today, and my sister was getting in touch with me about that. So I should have turned my phone off, but at any rate, here we go. When WPATH released Standards of Care 7, it added new language dubbing cross-sex hormones and transition surgery, quote, medically necessary. And all of this is footnoted, and you can see the language itself. And when WPATH published SOC 8, it further urged healthcare systems to provide these medically necessary treatments and eliminate any exclusions from their policy documents and medical guidelines that preclude coverage for any medically necessary procedures or treatments. And there it is right down in the footnotes. The medically necessary statement spans several pages of Standards of Care 8 and begins by recommending that, quote, healthcare systems should provide medically necessary gender-affirming healthcare for transgender and gender diverse people. It also quotes the American Medical Association's definition of medical necessity, and then declares that roughly 30 medical transition interventions are medically necessary. In Standards of Care 8, WPATH labeled as medically necessary virtually every pediatric medical transition service that a transition doctor could perform for a fee, including administering puberty blockers, quote, voice surgery, quote, counseling, and quote, hair removal from genital areas for gender affirmation, end quote, among many other transition services. WPATH also posts statements on its website falsely claiming that pediatric medical transition is medically necessary. Misrepresentation 2. SOC 8 claims that hormone therapy is considered a life-saving intervention. and that medical transition is associated with a substantial reduction in the risk of suicide attempts. WPATH asserts in Standards of Care 8 that medical transition treatments reduce, quote, suicidality, end quote, and, quote, suicidal ideation, end quote. WPATH also makes public statements falsely claiming that medical transition is, quote, life-saving, end quote. Misrepresentation 3. They state in SOC 8 that puberty blockers are fully reversible, in quotes. Misrepresentation 4. WPATH claims in SOC 8 that the administration of cross-sex hormones, quote, has been shown to improve quality of life and to decrease depression and anxiety, end quote. WPATH asserts that hormone therapy, quote, positively impacts the mental health and quality of life of children, end quote. Misrepresentation 5. It represents in SOC 8 that breast amputations are safe, effective, and result in better health and quality of life for girls experiencing dissatisfaction with or distress about their sex traits. SOC 8 claims that the efficacy of breast amputation has been demonstrated in multiple domains, including a consistent and direct increase in health-related quality of life, end quote. Thus, WPATH concludes that, quote, the evidence demonstrates breast amputation to be a safe and effective intervention, end quote. SOC 8 makes strong recommendations with respect to surgical interventions for children, thereby asserting that, quote, the evidence for the intervention is of high quality, end quote, and, quote, there are few downsides, end quote, and, quote, there is a high degree of acceptance among providers, end quote, for the treatment. Misrepresentation 6. WPATH misrepresents, excuse me, that SOC 8 is consensus-based expert opinion. That's a quote. WPATH makes public statements falsely claiming that medical transition is backed by expert consensus, end quote. WPATH falsely claims it follows the World Health Organization and the NAM, what is NAM? Standards on Managing Conflicts of Interest, NAM. What is that, Darla? Do you know? I should know, but I've lost it. WPATH falsely represents that it complied with these standards when it reviewed, quote, conflicts of interest as part of the SOC 8 committee member selection process, end quote, and concluded that no, quote, no conflicts of interest were significant or consequential, end quote. WPATH falsely claims that SOC 8 used the, quote, Delphi process, end quote, which is a formal method of developing recommendations based on expert consensus. WPATH falsely claims that SOC 8 followed the, quote, grade, end quote, system. SOC 8 makes, quote, strong recommendations, end quote, with respect to cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, and surgical interventions for children, thereby asserting that, quote, there is a high degree of acceptance among providers, end quote, for the treatment. Misrepresentation 7. Despite the low quality evidence supporting pediatric medical transition, WPATH represents that pediatric medical transition is the standard of care for children who express dissatisfaction with or distress about their sex traits. In Standards of Care 8, WPATH represents that cross-sex hormones are medically necessary for children who express discomfort with or distress about their sex traits, and that cross-sex hormone use is an appropriate treatment as early as the onset of puberty. SOC 8 makes strong recommendations, in quotes, with respect to cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, and surgical interventions for children, thereby asserting that, quote, the evidence for the intervention is of high quality, end quote, there are few downsides, quote, and, quote, there is a high degree of acceptance among providers for the treatment. Omission 8, SOC 8 provides a, quote, strong recommendation, end quote, that clinicians administer puberty blockers to children, thereby asserting that the evidence for the intervention is of high quality, end quote. There are few downsides, end quote, and there is a high degree of acceptance among providers for the treatment. But SOC 8 fails to disclose or adequately disclose risks and side effects like hot flashes, lethargy, and cognitive issues when puberty blockers are used for pediatric medical transition. Omission 9, SOC 8 makes, quote, strong recommendations, end quote, with respect to administering cross-sex hormones to children, thereby asserting that the evidence for the intervention is of high quality, quote, there are few downsides, and, quote, there is a high degree of acceptance among providers, end quote, for the treatment. But SOC 8 fails to disclose or to adequately discuss the existence and severity of risks and side effects associated with cross-sex hormones, including mood disturbances, vocal pain, pelvic floor dysfunction, clitoral discomfort, vaginal pain, persistent sexual dysfunctioning, continuing after cessation of use, and erectile pain. And finally, omission 10, SOC makes, quote, strong recommendations, end quote, with respect to surgical interventions for children, including breast amputation, thereby asserting that, quote, the evidence for the intervention is of high quality, end quote, there are a few downsides, quote, and, quote, there is a high degree of acceptance among providers, end quote, for the treatment. But SOC 8 fails to disclose or to adequately disclose risks and side effects associated with breast amputations, like its effects on non-erogenous sensation, inability to breastfeed, nerve damage, and necrosis of the nipples. And so then the complaint, the allegations have to do with the violations of the FTC, which prohibits unfair or deceptive acts or practices in or affecting commerce. And I think clearly this is commerce, although I said I would not offer my own commentary. Misrepresentations and deceptive omissions of material fact constitute deceptive acts or practices prohibited by the FTC Act. The FTC Act prohibits the dissemination of false advertising in or affecting commerce for the purpose of inducing, or which is likely to induce, the purchase of food, drugs, devices, services, or cosmetics. For purposes of the Act, puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones are a drug as defined in the Act. And so I think maybe that's enough for now. And if you have a strong interest, in knowing more about this, you can both Google and get the entire complaint, which is 123 pages, and actually is extremely well written in that it is, it's easy to understand. Okay, I need to put this aside real quick and find out what's going on here. Okay, Darla just told me that NAM stands for the National Academy of Medicine, and I should have known that, but I didn't, and I'm glad Darla looked it up. Okay, y'all, I guess that's it for now. I do hope that you will pay attention to this lawsuit. In my opinion, it could be a watershed event, depending on what the court in Fort Worth, where it was filed, what they rule and what render. And I think it's going to really be worth watching and paying attention to. And I will do that. And if you're interested, I will get back with you on, or maybe even if you're not interested, just because I'm interested, I might get back to you with where it is. Okay. Thank you, Darla in the booth. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you for watching it recorded on YouTube and other places. And also, please think about subscribing, liking, and joining in. This is a very, very important issue. And some of us, I think, are stuck in not knowing and then not wanting to know. But I think kids and their parents deserve that we take a real interest in this. Okay, thank you. And I think Darla is gonna roll us out now, and we will see you next week. All right, bye-bye.